Can our computers and smartphones be made to spy on us without our knowing? Who's engaging in cyber attacks and how? Next on The Line. This is On the Line, and I'm Eric Felton. Late in May, it was revealed that a new computer virus has been targeting computers in Iran and the Middle East. Named Flame, the sophisticated program was designed to capture information, from grabbing computer screenshots to recording phone calls and Skype conversations. How do such cyber attacks work? And what does it mean for the security and safety of the electronic devices so fully integrated into our daily lives? I'll ask my guest, Anup Ghosh, Chief Scientist at the Center for Secure Information Systems at George Mason University. Anup Ghosh, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So this most recent program that we've heard about, attacking not just computers on the internet, but mobile phone devices, is there any electronic device that isn't at some risk of being compromised through a cyber attack of some sort?
So if you look at how these attacks work, they're attacking devices that matter, right? So any device that's connected to the internet. We've always thought of our desktop computers and laptops being most vulnerable because we're all connected all the time. Now it's our smartphones, and increasingly it's critical infrastructure. So things like the computers that control power plants, water dams, and other critical infrastructures, transportation systems, are increasingly connected directly to the internet. And once they're connected to the internet, they're essentially open game for adversaries who are content on attacking these.
Now, why are all of these systems connected to the internet? What's the idea behind that?
You know, when it comes to critical infrastructures, you know, the things that you would normally say has got to be secured, the main driver is cost, believe it or not. So if I can connect power generation plants and these remote sites via the internet, I can cheaply maintain them. And so cost is the largest driver that has resulted in connecting these devices. Security was an afterthought. We all thought it was great how I could log into a device and do diagnostics and update it and potentially even control it without giving thought to, well, if I can do it, then someone else potentially can as well.
And yet, what we've heard about the Stuxnet virus that infected Iranian nuclear plants is that in that case they had plants where their computer systems were separated by an air gap, that they weren't connected to the internet, and even those devices were vulnerable.
That's right, and that brings up a great point, which is we can try to engineer in more sophisticated firewalls, if we can call it, like these air gaps that try to prevent a pure network-based attack, but a very sophisticated operation, which, as the New York Times revealed this past week, was actually organized by the United States and Israel, can bridge these air gaps through operations, right? So in that case, it's what's typically called a close-in attack. Someone who's either been turned or someone's been able to get to that network and physically insert a USB can bridge an air gap. But once you're there, what oftentimes is a fallacy is this perimeter, castle wall moats where all the defenses are at the perimeter. Once you get inside that perimeter, the vulnerabilities are there and relatively easy to exploit at that point.
How vulnerable are these vulnerabilities? I remember, a little over a decade ago, there was all this concern with the year 2000 and that planes would fall out of the sky, power plants would come into crisis mode, all sorts of bad things would happen because of a computer glitch. How severe are the risks if you not only have a glitch, but rather programs that are specifically designed to do some sort of damage?
Well, they are vulnerable, and the consequences of that vulnerability depend on the system which is attacked. The thing to keep in mind is these systems are constructed by humans. They're very complex programs, and in that process of constructing these programs, there will be human errors which get embedded in the code. So They'll fail. They will also be exploited. The trick is, from an adversarial point of view, what can I gain by exploiting this vulnerability? If you're not motivated, then you're relatively fine. But if there's much to be gained, the vulnerabilities will be found and exploited.
And in terms of fighting against those kinds of exploitation, is it about developing security systems, or is it about trying to think like the people trying to break into the system and find the risk points, find the 0 days, as they're called in computer term, that can be exploited?
Sure. So a lot of the focus is on, after you've deployed your system, either thinking like an adversary or trying to find known attacks. And the reality is we really need to walk this back to, how do I develop these systems more securely in the first place, right? So when human error is introduced, what can I do to test out that error? That's the best way of investing in security, is building it right in the first place. Barring that, however, because you'll never reach perfection in that process, we now need architectures that depend on errors being in that code, so that when someone attacks those systems, I don't have to know that attack ahead of time in order to stop it. And there's computer architectures and architectural constructs that have yet to be deployed that can, if properly implemented, can stop an attack from having catastrophic consequences.
Now, we've been talking about the threats to critical infrastructure and the sort of big issues that governments deal with, but these threats are also affecting the devices that people increasingly the world over are using in their daily lives, including smartphones.
Sure. So, all of us, or most of us, have several computing devices, one being our laptops or desktop at work. And these have a lot of programs that directly connect to the internet. And we have adversaries that come at us, whether it's organized cybercrime, hacktivists, in certain cases, nation states, depending on where you work. In addition, we have smartphones, right? Apple iPhones or Android-based phones. Well, these devices, increasingly, we're living our lives on them. So the more data we have about ourselves in these devices, and the more critical transactions we do on these devices, like banking, the more at risk we are with these devices getting exploited themselves by our adversaries.
And once upon a time, you had to really work to get people's personal information out of them. But increasingly, people are sharing all sorts of personal information, their locations, what they're purchasing, where they're going, who they're meeting with, all of these things as part of social media networks. Are those being exploited as well?
Well, they're being exploited by advertisers, the people that we are willingly sharing this data with, right? So a lot of the social media apps, for example, Foursquare or Twitter, we are in Instagram, another great example. So we're sharing pictures, we're sharing our lives with sometimes the entire world, other times just select groups of friends. But in the process of sharing our lives, we're actually revealing quite a lot about ourselves, our preferences, who we're meeting with, the things that we purchase, where we are. All that information is aggregated by advertisers and used to send targeted advertising towards you.
And have we seen that the sort of techniques and technologies that businesses develop are soon seem to be used by whether it's individual bad actors or even governments as well, trying to gain information about their people?
Yeah, oftentimes, before an organization is actually attacked by cyber means, there's a lot of reconnaissance that happens. So, for example, LinkedIn is a social network for business. A lot of people will put their current job, their whole resume on LinkedIn. And if I just do a little bit of searching on your organization, I'll find all the people that are working there who have a LinkedIn account. That gives me enough information about you to then send a targeted email, it's typically called a spearfish, that would get you to click on a link or open an attachment, because it is relaying information that's related to your job. If I can get you to click on a link or open an attachment...
If you know who works with me, you can better spoof pretending to be somebody I know.
Absolutely, especially with LinkedIn. If I know your boss's boss and I send you a LinkedIn invite from that individual, you're more likely to click on that LinkedIn, right?
So all of these threats, are they going to lead us at some point to not be able to be connected in this way that's produced all of this wonderful efficiencies and ability to connect with people the world over instantaneously? Is that very basic way we've been learning to live our lives, is that at risk?
I don't think so, because as much as the vulnerability that these networks and programs were man-made, well, so can the defenses. It just is a matter of us prioritizing that, in fact, we need to secure the programs, we need to secure the networks, and have the will to do so. Once all of our lives are on there, once all of our critical infrastructures, once we realize the defense of our nation, our intellectual property, the wealth of our country is at risk, we will spend the money it takes and we'll invest in actually securing these networks.
Anup Ghosh of the Center for Secure Information Systems at George Mason University. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
This is On the Line, and I'm Eric Felton. The computer worm that attacked computers in Iran's nuclear program was created by the U.S. and Israel, the New York Times reported last week. Planning for the cyber attack was started in the administration of President George W. Bush, according to the Times, but President Barack Obama expanded the program. Another computer virus, the recently discovered Flame virus, also targeted Iranian computers. The growth in computer warfare has led to calls for an international ban on cyber attacks. What are the international, political, and diplomatic implications of cyber warfare? Joining us to talk about it is Warren Strobel, editor-in-charge of U.S. foreign policy and national security coverage at Reuters. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
So now the U.S. has never officially acknowledged using a cyber attack, but there does seem to be a whole lot of officials talking on background, giving out an awful lot of information of late.
Which is really curious. The report in the New York Times and elsewhere is very highly classified, sensitive information. It makes one wonder how this got out or why this got out. And quite frankly, there are some people speculating that these reports sort of make the current president, Barack Obama, look good, strong on national security matters, and don't hurt his re-election chances.
Now, would there be any diplomatic effort or way of sort of trying to intimidate people that you're trying to keep from doing bad things to suggest we're actively engaged in cyber activities that will mess you up?
I guess it could be that, but there's an awful danger in doing that. By acknowledging this, let it be known that this attack was done by the United States and Israel, it sort of invites blowback in terms of other people. The bazaar is now open, and other people can attack us. And as Anup and I were talking before the show, the United States is very poorly defended against cyber attacks. And as he put it, we've sort of launched a weapon against which we don't have good defenses ourselves. So it's a very dangerous strategy to pursue.
Now, is the weapon being out there something that people can turn to their own uses, analyze, figure out how it was done?
Yeah, absolutely. And not just countries like Russia and China, but cybersecurity, cyber warfare doesn't require a huge infrastructure, a huge physical plant. So even countries like North Korea could do this. Maybe not this level of sophistication, but now that this is out there, they can analyze it and they can turn it to their own uses, potentially at least.
How involved is the U.S. in cyber war from all indications?
That's a really good question. It's very hard, or has been traditionally hard, to get officials to talk about the offensive side. They love to talk about what they're doing on the defensive side to protect U.S. government computers, to protect critical infrastructure, to protect American businesses and so forth. They don't like to talk about offensive. What we do know, do know now that the United States and Israel were behind this attack, or this Stuxnet virus. It makes one wonder, it makes me wonder what else is being done by the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command. Probably a lot of other things out there that we don't know about. During the conflict in Libya last year, there was a debate over whether to use cyber warfare against the regime, the government of Colonel Gaddafi. Ultimately, it was decided not to.
Now, this was the possibility of trying to take over air defense systems,
precisely,
computer-based.
You remember the stories and other sort of military assets. And as it was reported at the time, it was decided not to because of the possibility of blowback. You start a precedent. Yet in the case of Iran, they went ahead and did it. And I think what it tells us is that, from the U.S. viewpoint at least, the Iranian nuclear program was such a concern that they decided to go ahead and launch this weapon, even though there was a potential downside.
A combination of there being a potential large threat and also not a lot of good options when the U.S. started thinking about this in terms of a way of avoiding real war by engaging in cyber war.
Yeah, precisely. And there was also, Eric, a third consideration, which was, this was getting to the end of the Bush administration, as you mentioned in the intro. There was concern that the debate over Iran's nuclear program, or actually the progress of the program, might intrude on the U.S. presidential election in 2008, and it was seen as a way of buying time by setting back Iran's program, that the next president would have more time to deal with it, if that makes sense. So that was part of their thinking as well.
Right, and then this same kind of calculation, according to the New York Times, went into the Obama administration's decision on whether to maintain the program or accelerate the program. This idea of buying time to let other kinds of pressure, be it sanctions or diplomacy, come into play.
Precisely. That was as best we can tell, that was the thinking.
Now, you've mentioned a couple of times the problem, the threat of blowback of the U.S. Putting out technological problems for others that then may turn around and come back and be problems for the U.S. How much discussion is going on in policy circles in the U.S. about this? It would seem that the U.S. is more technologically connected than probably any other society, relies more heavily on the internet, on computer systems. So it would seem that the U.S. would have the most to lose from cyber attacks becoming commonplace.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, think about it, Eric. You and I could probably no longer make it through our day without the connectedness of ATM machines, going through the metro and swiping our card, our iPhones, our Blackberries. I don't know if the most connected society on earth. Some people say South Korea is actually the most, in terms of bandwidth and stuff. We're probably the most dependent on these systems for everything from national security to finance to our personal lives. And it's not just the technology that gets out there. This sends a message that the field is open. A precedent has been set, a bar has been raised, and others can try and do the same to us. There have been a number of serious cyber attacks on U.S. businesses, even on the Pentagon. I think I read somewhere that the Pentagon is probed by others 300,000 times a day. If I have the figure right, just all the time people from other countries are trying to get into Pentagon computer systems. A lot of people think it will take a digital Pearl Harbor, as the term goes, to make us wake up. And by that I mean an attack on a water plant somewhere that floods a city, or an attack on a electrical system that shuts down a major power grid, something like that.
And given the number of probes against the Pentagon on a daily basis, is the thinking in Washington that, well, these efforts are going to be made against the U.S. any way you look at it, so the U.S. might as well be in the game somehow? I
think that's probably part of it, and part of it was just getting back to Iran, the sense, whether true or not, that Iran's nuclear program was such a threat that it had to be dealt with despite the consequences. In terms of protecting ourselves, there are all sorts of problems, frankly. There's been cyber legislation that's been sitting up on Capitol Hill for months, if not years, and there's all sorts of debates over privacy, over which committee has jurisdiction, over how do you help get the secret parts of government, like the NSA and the Pentagon, to help the Department of Homeland Security protect civilian government networks, the so-called .gov. That's been a problem. It's just, it's high time we do something.
What are the threats beyond, attacks on critical infrastructure? We look at something as simple as the WikiLeaks case, where you have what appears to be some individual getting access to vast databases in the U.S. and then making public all sorts of diplomatic traffic, things that end up not only being damaging to the U.S., but of course anyone having any interaction with U.S. diplomatic circles often had their communications compromised one way or another. And what are the implications for that?
They're huge, and the whole thing over WikiLeaks is a fascinating example of the sort of the conundrum we face in the more networked world. There was this thing called CIPRNet, which was set up or improved after 9/11, because of the 9/11 attacks, the dots weren't connected and there was not enough information sharing to stop that attack. So they decided to do more information sharing and make it easier for agencies opportunities to share information across the government. Bradley Manning, the alleged person who allegedly took those cables and made them public, got access to that allegedly, and
being charged with this was a very low-level Army
very low-level, and yet he got access to 250,000 roughly State Department cables, which embarrassed the U.S. tremendously, may have made foreign diplomats, and not even diplomats, just foreign nationals in general, less likely to talk to U.S. diplomats, set back diplomatic relations, and it's just an example of what happens now.
And does this affect other kinds of international cooperation, not just communications, but when there are efforts to, put together military cooperation among NATO? You've got lots of information that has to be shared through all sorts of systems.
It could, and just as we start out talking about the very example that this U.S. involvement in Stuxnet and these attacks got out might make our partners less likely to cooperate with us.
Now, there have been a lot of talk about trying to put together some kind of ban on cyber attacks. Is there any kind of ban on this that could actually stop what is then a surreptitious endeavor?
That's a very good question. I mean, if you step back and look historically, new weapons have come along, treaties have been negotiated to either stop or limit them, chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, etc. There have been some very initial talks about limits, an international treaty that would limit or at least guide what one could do in cyberspace in terms of warfare. There's some very initial talks with the U.S. and Chinese on cybersecurity. Most of the U.S.-China talks, apparently, from what we've been told, just talking past one another. So 10, 15 years down the line, possibly. It's at a very, very early stage right now.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Warren Strobel is editor-in-charge of U.S. Foreign Policy and National Security for the Reuters News Service. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Before we go, I'd like to invite you to send us your questions or comments. Come visit us at our new webpage, voanews.com/ontheline. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you join us again next week for On the Line.
Put down that cell phone and listen up. What you're doing behind the wheel and its dangerous effects next on Smart Living.
Drifted across the center line and struck another car. They were both killed on impact.
Just look at the car next to you. Their eyes are probably not 100% focused on the road. New research is showing distractions behind the wheel are the #1 cause of accidents in the U.S. #1, talking with a passenger or on the phone. This includes daydreaming and messing with controls in the car. Distraction #2, drowsy driving. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration reports 100,000 accidents happen every year in the U.S. because people start to doze off behind the wheel. The last distraction, failing to yield. Virginia Highway Safety found that 80% of accidents were caused in 2009 because of failure to yield and obey street signs. Some things to keep in mind before hitting the highway. I'm Erica Washington reporting.